Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's so nice to see everyone here today. Today, what we're going to be doing and talking about is how to keep your coffee fresh. I know a lot of folks right now are probably purchasing a little bit more coffee just to make sure they have plenty on hand. And so, what I want to do for us today is talk about how to make your coffee taste its best for the longest. We'll do a little nerdy science stuff too. I want to talk about kind of how flavor in coffee is developed and where that comes from and how we can preserve it the longest. And also, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to answer any questions y'all have. So, really excited to join in and chat today. I hope everyone has a delicious cup of coffee to start their day, and we'll kind of get started going in. First of all, when it comes to coffee freshness, right, there is a lot for us to consider. Overall, when we are thinking about coffee freshness, we probably know that having fresh roasted coffee is really important, right? But in reality, coffee freshness and flavor is really developed a lot earlier in the lifespan of a coffee. What that means is that coffee, generally speaking, is going to have most of its flavor developed through roasting, but before it even gets to be roasted, it starts its life as a seed of a tree, a seed of a fruit, rather. And just like all seeds, it needs some energy because eventually it's going to turn itself into a tree, or it wants to, right? So these coffee beans that we have when they're roasted really come from seeds. And those seeds really wanted to be a tree one day. But instead, what we've done is we've gone forward and roasted them instead so that we can drink and enjoy it together. Now, when I think about that though, it's important to realize that as a seed, it's got three pretty important components in it, right? So the first, here we're going to have a little coffee bean up here. So one of the first things that I think about with the flavor of coffee are the sugars and sweetness of coffee. I'll draw some little sugar cubes as well. So when it comes to coffee, right, it's got these natural sugars in there, usually in the form of starches, these long chain complex carbohydrates, right? These are things that the coffee seed is going to want to use to be able to turn into a tree. It's stored energy, right? One of the other key pieces that we're going to talk about are oils or fats, right? In a very, very similar way to sugar, right? Our oils, which I'll draw a little oil decanter here. You can see my art is excellent as always. So that's our oil decanter. So the oils that are present in coffee function much the same as the sugars, right? These are stored energies that the coffee seed wants to use to turn into a tree, right? But when we roast them, we're going to change those things, right? These complex sugars will start to break down. They actually are these really long chain carbohydrates that are hard for our tongue to detect. But when we add heat, you can see I'm an expert artist. That's our fire from the roaster. These sugars become simplified, and they continue to become simplified and simplified until eventually they turn into really simple sugars and also a gas, carbohydrate or carbon dioxide, right? The carbohydrates, carbon and hydrogen atoms that are bound together with the addition of heat and energy cause them to break apart, and eventually carbon dioxide starts to form inside of our coffee. So this turns into CO2 gas. So we'll have these nice little gas lines, right? It also turns into some nice sweetness that we can actually detect when we drink it. But we'll come back to why CO2 is important in just a moment. The other thing is that these oils that are there, when they're in the seed itself, when they're up here in the seed, they actually are trapped inside of this like latticed work sort of honeycomb structure inside of the coffee itself. If you ever see a picture, an electron microscope picture of a coffee bean, on the inside it kind of looks like this, where it's just a lot of little holes like this that are, after roasting, filled with gas, right? What we want to do is get water into these in order to get flavor out. The other thing is these holes are filled with oil, right? In fact, we have cell walls that just function like, think of like a cell, generally, like your biology class, right? Those cell walls are also protecting the oils, right? So we're gonna have some oil in here. Once we add heat though, these cell walls start breaking down and the oil starts seeping out, right? If you've ever seen, for instance, dark roasted coffee, right? It's a great example. Dark roasted coffee has that sheeny, sort of oily exterior, and that's largely because whenever the heat of the roaster is affecting the seed, those cell walls pop and the oils start to surface all around the coffee, right? That's a good thing though in some ways, right? We want those oils in our coffee, and maybe not from the dark roast necessarily, maybe we prefer a lighter roast, but those oils are contributing that nice heavy mouthfeel. It's giving that texture we love in coffee, right? We've got those sugars that are giving us sweetness, but the oils give us that nice heavy body and that nice rich quality that we love in our roasted coffee, right? In our coffee drinks. But the issue is, when we talk about storing them, this CO2 and oil thing becomes a lot more important. So, going back to this screen right here, one of the things that you're going to see is that over time, this CO2 is going to want to escape out of here. And that's something in coffee that we call degassing, right? We're going to have a broken cell here. So when coffees are degassing, though, it's a kind of a good thing, because if these holes are full of CO2, right, if this is full of gas, it makes it really hard for water to come in when we're brewing and pull out all of the flavors, like the sugars we want and the oils that we want, right? So we want enough time for the roasted coffee to dispel. Thank you, Mina. It is a great sound effect. I appreciate that. I promise plenty more Foley work to come with these videos as well. So with the water going into the coffee particles, if they're full of gas, it makes it really hard for the flavors to be pulled out. In fact, we actually start bringing that gas into the flavor of the coffee, and it can often start tasting sour or kind of sharp and kind of aggressive, right? So fresh roasted coffee is full of it. Now, generally speaking, right, I've heard when I was in the industry, when I first got started, right, that the best thing in the world was coffee that was roasted like 10 minutes ago. You want it so fresh. That turns out that's not quite accurate. After all, when it's at that point, the coffee has just gone through some major changes, both chemically and physically, because it's been roasted. It's full of that CO2 gas, and if you tried to brew with it, it would end up tasting kind of sharp, kind of aggressive, kind of sour, not super pleasant, not that rich, lovely cup that we normally want, right? Instead, what we usually recommend is giving the coffee enough time to degas so that it's not full of that CO2. It's still got some of it, but it's not so full that it's going to affect the flavor, right? So what that means for you is that when you're thinking about storing your coffee, while it's good to have freshly roasted, you don't want it hot out of the roaster super right away. It's usually good to give it a couple of days to rest. Generally speaking, from our coffee roaster, you're going to be getting coffees that were roasted usually a day before, depending on where you're getting them shipped to, right? Whenever an order comes in, we're roasting to order. And a lot of coffee roasters around the country do that as well. Now, with that, once you receive the coffee, generally after shipping, you're pretty much in that window. But if you're getting it fresh from one of our retail locations or from a grocery store that just got it freshly delivered, right, it's not a big deal if you want to let it sit for a day or two to let that degassing process happen. Now, outside of degassing, though, there is the other issue, though. We've got that CO2 gas down here, which is great, but now we have these oils that are shooting out of the cell walls after you've added heat, right? Now, one of the things that oils really are fond of is oxygen. And when they have a lot of oxygen on them, they start to oxidize and they start to go rancid. Not a great look for coffee, not super tasty. So with that, we want to be considerate that the more oxygen that is, the more your coffee is exposed to oxygen rather, the more likely it is to start that rancidification process, right? Meaning that the coffee is going to start tasting kind of funky and off, right? If you've ever had very, very old coffee that's been left out in open air, you've probably tasted something similar to this. I know that I did back when I was at my great-grandma's house in Ortonville. I love her to death. She's one of the best people, but there were definitely some old coffees that we had when we were up there, and it was not tasty at all. So to avoid that rancidification process, what we want you to do is try to avoid as much contact with oxygen, right? Now, when it comes to our bags, right? Bags like this one that you're seeing here, we actually help this process along in shipping because what we do is we flush these bags with nitrogen gas, right? Nitrogen air. The nice thing about nitrogen is that it's inert, meaning that it has no sort of like special characteristics. It just sort of displaces the oxygen inside of those bags, meaning that when your coffee gets added in after they've been nitrogen flushed, that oxygen's displaced, so there's less effect of the oxygen onto those oils. There's less effect on it on the coffee overall. Now, though, we've given coffee a couple days to rest. We're avoiding oxygen by keeping it in possibly airtight containers, right? Those are two great things you can do to have the best flavors out of your coffee. The other thing is, once we've opened up that bag, we're also starting to let out some other gases, which brings me to the third piece over here, which we're going to call VOC, which is the nerdy way of saying nice smells. VOC means volatile organic compounds, right? Those are specifically compounds that are going to contribute to flavor. Oh, thank you, Julie. I appreciate it. Yeah, there is so much chemistry in coffee. Believe it or not, I have a degree in English. I was never a chemist. I did not do well in chemistry in high school, I'll say completely. But I love coffee, and it got me so excited to learn about chemistry. So we'll keep talking about it. So, like I was saying, the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds that are there, those VOCs are actually the smells, right? All it means is that at room temperature, if something is volatile, it starts to turn into a gas, right? And so if it turns into a gas, it's something we can perceive both and as an aroma, right? In our nasal cavity, in our nose, and also when we drink, we have some receptors that pick up those smells. And it turns out smell is a huge part of taste. This is most evidence in my experience on airplanes. And what I mean by that is when you're on an airplane, the air pressure, it's less air pressure inside of an airplane, right? And so with that, smells don't travel quite as easily. Now I know that might sound absurd if you've ever sat on an airplane next to someone that decided to take their shoes off first thing. Thank you, Buttery Croissant. Yeah, oxygen is definitely the enemy. In this case though, with volatile organic compounds, the density of the air is how those get transferred. When you're in an airplane, air is less dense, and so food does not have as much flavor. That's why whenever I'm on an airplane, I'm usually drinking ginger ale, even though I'm not a huge ginger ale drinker outside of that, unless if it is a special ginger ale from Kentucky. Shout out to all of my Ale 8 fans, Ale 8 ones. If you want to send some to my house, I'm not going to tell you my address online, but contact me after and I'll gladly take any Ale 8 you have. Anyway, all that to say that when you're in an airplane, you taste less because the air is less dense, you smell less, you experience less flavor, right? Now, when we roast coffee, right, what we're doing is we're actually creating, or rather expressing out some of those amazing smells that are naturally present in this roasted coffee bean, depending on where it's grown and the varieties, and a lot of other factors, right? And those smells make up a huge part of what we taste in coffee. Another good example of this, by the way, is if you have any candy at home, something I'd recommend trying is try eating a piece of candy but plug it in your nose the first time you eat it, the first time you start chewing on it or tasting it, right? And try to identify what it is. This is super great if you have, for instance, like Skittles. Try eating a Skittle with your nose pinched, and I guarantee you you're not going to be able to detect what flavor it is until you release your nose and allow all of those flavors to kind of flush back in as aromas, right? Now, that said, though, they are volatile, right? Those smells in coffee are particularly volatile, and that means, here we'll make some happy smells here. Happy smells. VOCs. Now, in roasting, it makes it easier for those things to become expressed, but over time, those smells want to go away. We'll have the smells drifting away over time. Here, this is time. Cool. So with time, CO2 gases go out. We want to avoid oxidation, but the VOCs start to drift away. Now, the best evidence of this, every time you open up a bag of coffee, it smells amazing, right? That smell is probably one of my favorite parts about drinking and enjoying coffee. After all, that fresh roasted, fresh bag smell, it's kind of how I have been waking up, how I've been feeling a little bit more normal these days anyway. But whenever you're opening that and you're experiencing that lovely smell, it's actually the flavor running all the way out of the coffee as fast as it can, right? Those volatile smells want to go out, they want to leave. Now, To avoid that, right, we want to try to minimize the opportunity for it to leave the coffee. And so we can do that in a couple of ways. The first way is to keep our coffee whole bean, right? If you have a grinder at home and you can grind your coffee fresh, this coffee right here has less of the gas escaping because there's less surface area exposed. However, once I break this coffee apart, all of a sudden there's much more surface area for it to come out, right? There's much more places and holes that are now exposed to let those nice smells, those good smells escape away. Now that doesn't mean you should feel bad if you don't have a grinder at home, not whatsoever, right? But if you do have a grinder at home, if you do have something that you can use to grind your coffee, if you buy it whole bean, it will taste better longer. Oh yeah, Chris, thank you so much. You do need to check the smell of the package bag in the grocery store to get the freshest beans. You're gonna get some of that smell right out of the bag, especially on bags like these, right? We have bags that have what are called two-way release valves, which, hold on, let me switch over to this view right here. Can't really see it on this bag since it is a very dark bag. Here, let me show it off on the other side. These little gas valves, which you can't really see in the light, there it is. That gas valve is how gas is let out. That CO2 gas, that degassing process gets out through that valve. And you can also give it a little squeeze, and that's where some smell will come out too. All right. So if you keep your coffee whole bean, right, you're exposing it to less oxygen, less air. And with that, you're allowing less of those nice smells and aromas to leave your coffee. However, right, if you do have your coffee ground, do not worry, right? There's still great ways you can maintain freshness. Namely, if you keep your coffee in an airtight container and only open it when you're getting coffee out to brew with, right? The more you can kind of trap those things in together and not let them have a lot of breathing room, the longer your coffee will taste better, right? That's both for the VOCs, those aromatic compounds, and also for the oxidation and oiling rancidification process, right? So generally speaking, whole bean or ground, if you keep your coffee in an airtight container, it's going to taste better longer, which is what we're really looking for, right? Now, that said, right, how many people out there grew up with coffee in the fridge or the freezer? I know I did. I definitely had coffee in my freezer at home for a long time, including when I went to college. I would keep my coffee in the freezer. It was one of those things that I was always told, that's how you keep your coffee the freshest, the longest. I'm here to tell you that is kind of true, but it's true with kind of a big asterisk next to it. And what I mean by that is that whenever, yeah, exactly, Julie, thank you. So when your coffee is in a freezer, right, there are a couple things that can happen with it that will start to degrade it a little bit faster, in fact. So going back over here, what you can see is that, right, that's the pretend image of a microscopic piece of coffee, right? Within that, these holes love water. That's why they brew well, right? When the gas is out, water can get in. It kind of absorbs into those holes really quickly, and it's fantastic. It's almost like a sponge, right? Now, the problem is, though, our freezers have a lot of moisture in them, right? And so if we allow that moisture into the coffee, it'll actually start degrading it faster, right? And so if we leave our coffee in an unprotected container in a freezer, what ends up happening is that water gets in and starts to break it down. And that's not what we want, right? We want to maintain the freshness and the flavor. We don't want our coffee to break down until we're ready for it to break down as a delicious cup of coffee. So anyway, with that, if you keep your coffee in an airtight container in your freezer, it's going to be a lot better, right? These airtight containers are going to be a thing that you'll hear pretty regularly, is that having things in an airtight container is much better overall. Now, that said, one other thing to consider, right? So moisture isn't only just present in your freezer, it's also present in the world around us. And whenever we take something that has been cold and start to make it hot, or something that's hot and make it cold, right? Rather, we know that condensation forms, right? That whole like droplets on the edge of the glass, right? And so with that, if we're taking coffee into and out of and into and out of the freezer, that's going to cause moisture to form around the outside of the coffee, and it's going to cause the coffee to start to break down as well. So with that, one thing that we want to be considerate of if we're keeping our coffee in the freezer is that we only really want it in there if we're storing it, right? Once we're ready to start really getting into that bag of coffee and enjoying it every day, what I would recommend is take that coffee out of the freezer and put it into a cabinet away from a lot of direct sunlight, away from anything that's going to have a lot of oxygen or really distinct smells. And then just only take out what you need whenever you need to make a delicious cup of coffee, right? If you're constantly moving it back and forth out of a freezer and into a freezer, that condensation can form and it can be kind of less than great. One other thing to know, right, is that, again, these coffees are porous and they have all those nice smells coming into them. However, that porosity makes it really easy for the coffee to pick up smells of the world around it. So this is another reason why airtight containers, you're going to hear me say that a lot, airtight containers are so helpful for preserving the quality and freshness of your coffee, because they're not going to let any smells in, right? I had a friend who... this is a not super great story for my friend, and it's not me, I promise, maybe, no. I had a friend who really liked smoked salmon and often would have it in his refrigerator. And I was asking me one day, like, man, my coffee just tastes weird. I think I need to try out a different roaster. And so I was like, well, okay, what roaster is it? And it was someone that I really enjoyed. And I was like, oh, okay, what coffee is it? Maybe it's just a coffee you don't like. And it was a delicious coffee. And I was like, oh, okay, well, where are you keeping your coffee? And it turns out my friend was actually keeping his coffee in his fridge out of an airtight container next to some smoked salmon. And so the coffee started tasting like smoked salmon. I can't imagine that was the best way to start a day, right? So with that, if it's in an airtight container, if it's away from strong smells, it's going to taste even better, so much longer. Ooh, is there a particular type of airtight container I recommend? Thank you so much, Taylor. Well, there's a few really fantastic options out there. I tend to just use like a Tupperware at home or a ball jar, right? Anything that's not going to let a ton of air in and out. There's some vacuum sealed canisters that you can find. We'll have, I might be able to post some links into the chat later. So if you come back and look at this video later, we'll post some in the description for some airtight containers you can take a look at. But yeah, I would generally recommend anything that you've got, really, right? You could do this with Tupperware, you could do this with ball jars, you could do this, if you have a vacuum sealed canister, that's all the better, right? Anything that's going to just keep that oxygen and other smells out and keep the good smells in. It's even better too if some of those vacuum sealed canisters have one-way release valves, so it can help the coffee degas as well. So making it short, making it sweet, making it to the point. Here are my best tips with all of that in mind to keep your coffee super fresh, tasting its best longest, right? Number one, make sure to buy coffee that's already good and roasted fresh. If you're buying from us, for instance, it's going to be roasted fresh for you, especially if you're buying online or at any of our groceries. We're really good about maintaining freshness. A lot of local roasters are too, so don't be afraid to purchase coffees as long as you know it's freshly roasted. Number two is that you want to keep your coffee somewhere where it's not going to be exposed to a lot of air, right? Airtight canisters. Number three is you can store your coffee in the freezer, but generally I'd only recommend doing it if it's just there as a storage thing before you start using it. Once you start using it, take it out of the freezer, let it live in a cabinet somewhere. Number four, keep it away from tons of really intense smelling things, right? It's a good idea to keep it away from really intense spices or herbs, otherwise it might pick up some of that smell. And then number five is that once a coffee's been opened, generally speaking, even if you're following all of the best practices in the world, once you've opened that bag, you want to be considerate of the fact that generally coffee is going to taste its best in about 3 weeks after you've opened that bag, 3 to 4 weeks. So you've got about a month once you've opened a bag of coffee to enjoy it completely and thoroughly before you start seeing it tail off in flavor, right? Now, before I let you go and enjoy the rest of your day and any delicious coffee you're going to be experiencing, I'd be remiss not to tell you about where you can get some more of this kind of information. If you go to our blog, which is on our website, Portland Coffee Roasters, you would just go up to the People section right here and go to our blog. I'm going to switch back to our blog right here. Once you go to our blog, you can come over to these articles, and it's a little article that my colleague Scott, our coffee educator, writes every week. And so this week he's got some of the same tips we were talking about here and a little bit more information in depth. So if you have any questions or if you're curious about anything in particular, just come on over to portlandcoffeeroasters.com and check out our blog. There's always going to be a companion blog to the live stream. So we want to make it easy for you to find information about how to keep your coffee best. Also, if you're in the market to pick up some delicious coffees, we are running a special right now where you can buy 2 12-ounce bags of coffee and get a third one for free. So great opportunity to buy up a little bit of the coffee. I know I've been going through like a bag every few days since I've been brewing more coffee at home. And so please feel free to enjoy that with us. And then also, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for being here and being a part of our stream. I'm really excited to continue doing these things. Next week, we're going to do something really fun. We're going to be talking about how roast affects the flavor of coffee, specifically talking about light roast versus dark roast. We're going to talk things like flavor and caffeine and some other of the fun variables that are impacted when you actually start roasting coffee and you roast it differently, right? That said, if you have any thoughts, if you have any questions, if you have any ideas kicking around about coffee, if you have anything that you've been trying to do coffee-wise at home when you're just like, I don't know, I feel like I'm not getting it right, I would definitely encourage you to put a comment on our video here, right? We want to know what's most interesting to you about the delicious coffees that you're having at home and how we can help you have even better and more fantastic coffees all the time. So please leave a comment here. Also, if you would subscribe to our channel, you'll get these updates more regularly whenever we're doing streams and as we continue to do other kinds of video content. Yeah, and I'm excited too. Roasting has such a big impact. Thank you so much, by the way, for posting on there as well, my colleagues, about the link that was mentioned for our blog. But like I said, it's been such a pleasure spending time with y'all. Before I leave, I just want to double check, does anyone have any other questions I can help answer now while we're live and streaming? I want to give everyone a chance to share and discuss some coffee pieces, particularly around freshness. That being said, if you're like, oh man, I'm so good, don't worry. But I want to give everyone enough time. I'm going to keep talking for a little bit so the chat has a chance to catch up. By the way, still sipping on that fantastic coffee, our seasonal coffee. It is delicious, still so caramelly, still so nutty, kind of figgy today, and I really like that. It's a nice kind of subtle and soft but delicious fruity quality to it. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any questions coming through right now, which is totally great. That said, if you have anything that comes to mind later, feel free to leave it in the comments and we will respond right away. We love interacting with y'all and having a chance to connect. And I hope everyone is enjoying themselves to the best of their ability, enjoying great coffees. Ooh, Anna, great question. Will I do a stream on coffee brewing options? I absolutely will. We're going to talk through a couple different ways to brew coffee at home. Last week we talked about Chemexes. I want to talk about AeroPresses. We are going to talk about making coffee on like a coffee brewer and give some tips about some coffee brewers we really love. If you have a home coffee brewer that you're sort of on the fence on, there's some really great options out there that we'll talk about. But if there's any particular brewing options you're interested in learning more about, let us know. That to say, though, I'm going to sign out now. I just wanted to say thank you guys so much. Please stay curious, stay caffeinated, and stay safe out there. And we will see you all soon. Thank you again. Have a great day.